Hundreds rallied in Washington, D.C. on March 30th, kicking off a week of protests against a meeting marking the 70th anniversary of NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
When I was in the military, I actually worked for a subcommand of NATO. And to see what NATO is now, which is a very aggressive military organization that has gotten the former Soviet Union countries as a part of it in direct contradiction to what the U.S. government told the Soviet Union government back in the 1990s.
The meeting comes amid heightening tensions with Russia. NATO's Secretary General recently announced Georgia will be joining the alliance. The West promised the Soviet Union it wouldn't expand 1 inch eastward in the 90s.
What exactly is wrong with the expansion of NATO? These countries want to join NATO. Like Georgia wants to join NATO. They say they feel safer with NATO protection. What's so wrong about that?
And the Russian government says they feel much less safe with a U.S.-led military force on their border. NATO has already expanded to the border of Russia, heightening the danger of a clash between two nuclear nations far beyond what was seen in the previous Cold War.
And Trump says he wants to add Brazil and perhaps Colombia to NATO. What's your response to that?
Well, Colombia is already a so-called global partner in NATO, and Brazil, now there's some discussion around that possibility also. But again, that reveals the true nature of NATO. If NATO was supposed to be concerned about the North Atlantic area, why is it expanding into South America? The answer is because NATO is an instrument of U.S. and Western imperialism, and that's the understanding we're trying to bring to people today.
Well, thank God there's not been actual military conflict between NATO and Russia. We don't want that. But when you look at the very aggressive, offensive exercises that are going on now in all the Baltic countries, now NATO and the U.S. has a military base in Poland. So there's a big buildup of NATO forces along the Russian border, and that's what the Russians are so concerned about. And we certainly hope that the Russians will not respond to NATO's aggression, and that's why we're trying here to get NATO to stop its aggressive activities toward Russia.
Some emphasized the lack of investment in jobs and education compared to growing military spending.
And here today, obviously, to stand up, particularly as we get close to the anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King assassination, we are reminded of the issues that he taught us about in terms of poverty, racism, and militarism. Right? Those are the three evils that he cited as being the things that were holding back human progress. And really, when we talk about NATO and peace, you're talking about a concerted efforts of military in order to check democracies and check emerging movements and to basically suppress them. And so that's why we're out here today saying that we need to preserve peace, and peace really necessitates a demilitarization.
I'm here today because I thought it was important at an anti-war rally to talk about another occupied group of people, which is poor people across the United States. We are being gentrified out of our neighborhoods. We suffer when money is spent on war because money is not spent on our schools, it's not spent on education, it's not spent on the basic necessities of life. More people have died now from the opiate crisis in our country than died from the Vietnam War.
When the debates come down around education, for example, there's always the question of how can we pay for it, or the issue comes down around affordable housing, or subsidized housing, or public housing. The issue is that nobody really has a passion towards it in terms of the political structure. But if you talk about a military base being built, or you talk about the perfection and the creation of a new weapon, nobody ever debates that because it's a foregone conclusion that can be afforded when other stuff cannot.
What would be the equivalent of what the West is doing to Russia's border? What would be? Could you give me like an equivalent to like something happening to the U.S. just to like kind of give people just to put it in perspective?
Sure, that's kind of like the Russians or the Chinese saying to Canada and Mexico, "Hey, come over and join us because our little coalition will help defend you against the aggressions of the United States." And I think that's the closest analogy there is, or all the Central American countries forming an alliance against the United States, sponsored by like Russia or China. And we wouldn't want that, just like the Russians don't want the alliance that's formed against them.
Events are planned all week in Washington to oppose NATO. For The Real News, this is Jessel Noor reporting from Washington, D.C.